Aloha. Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title is No Kings Protest. 5 million show up. Troops' $45 million birthday parade fizzled. The Kings protest. The cities across the country, across America, experienced very large numbers of people that turned out. New York City, 50,000 to 200,000. I know that's a wide range. Chicago, 75,000. Seattle, 70,000. Out of 2,100 rallies, an estimated total of 5 million turned out for the No Kings protest. And in place to oppose that on the very same day was Donald Trump's birthday parade, complete with tanks, jeeps, and soldiers festooned in Continental Army uniforms. There was no King's protest on that day in Washington, D.C. that was side by side with Donald Trump's parade. Donald Trump wasn't very happy, reports are starting to tell us. So this is the beginning of people turning out to protest an autocratic approach to Donald Trump's administration. It will take far more than federal court decisions to make a difference, to blunt the assault on the rule of law and the Constitution. To talk about the No Kings protest and Donald Trump's parade, I have with me my special esteemed guest, David Larson, professor of law at Mitchell-Hamline University. And I have with me Jeff Portnoy, senior partner at Cage Schutte Law Firm. Good morning, and of course, always, my esteemed co-host, Jay Fidel, CEO of ThinkTech Hawaii. Good morning, gentlemen. Jay, right to you. 5 million. 5 million people across the country that showed up. That's nothing to brush off as no big deal, nothing to sneeze at. 2,100 events. It's a statement. It's a statement as strong and big as President Johnson saw back in the Vietnam War protests. We haven't seen anything really quite like this since Donald Trump in his first term. Even then, these numbers, 5 million, didn't even come close. So what's your take on this No Kings protest? Will we see more? And will they grow in size?
First, I think the magic ingredient on the 5 million is Trump's brutality. And those particular incidents where people were manhandled inappropriately. And I think people really react to that. And what you get out of that is the American ethic is you don't want to be cruel. Cruelty doesn't work in this country. On the other hand, you have to remember there are a lot of people that, at least in theory, support his immigration policy. And the question is, why do it with cruelty? He didn't have to do it with cruelty. But apparently, there's this quota thing going on between he and Stephen Miller. And that's why they were so aggressive. And the aggressive part of it is what led to the 5 million. Will it happen again? Well, if Trump is smart, which is the jury's out on that. Well, the jury's not out on that. He's not smart. But if he were smart, he would not be brutal. He would not be so theatrical about beating people up. And thus, it would be less likely that the 5 million would go back to the streets. Of course, there's the fear factor, too. And whenever he arrests somebody, including sitting legislators, that does intimidate. And hopefully the press will cover that in a way so that people do not approve of that. So far, they do not approve of that. And whether it will be worse, I suggest that if there is cause to have the 5 million people back in the street, it will be worse. There'll be more people back in the street. I think they're going to be even more offended the next time. The question is whether Trump gives them the reason, the magic recipe to be offended, so offended as they were on Saturday. Part of it, has to be this ridiculous parade. It was a counter event. And if the parade hadn't been happening, I suggest to you it might not have been 5 million. That seemed to exacerbate the situation. Nobody likes a military dictator type of parade, so that probably made it worse. And one more point, and I'll get off, and that is that you and I talked, and we came to the conclusion over the weekend that Trump would try to grab the headlines again this week because he was so unhappy, so offended by the lack of adulation that he had on Saturday at the parade. And sure enough, that's what happened. He's back in the headlines again, threatening a huge war in the Middle East, a regime change, a demand for unconditional surrender, all of that. And that certainly is top of the headlines right now. So he's managed to control the news cycle yet again. And so it's almost like the parade and the 5 million are becoming old news already. And we're 3 days in. That's my thought.
Good point. Excellent points. David, out of all Americans, depending on what poll you look at, 64% of Americans stated that the 45 million expenditure for Donald Trump's birthday parade, we'll call it the birthday parade, thought was a waste of money. Now, to break that down, 72% of the independents thought it was a waste of money, taxpayer dollars. 88% Democrats felt it was a waste of taxpayer dollars. 65% of the GOP felt it was a very good reason to spend $45 million. So, given all these numbers, and given the big, beautiful budget that's in the Senate right now, and given the Doge cuts that we've experienced, was this bad timing for a $45 million expenditure? And do you agree with Jay that maybe that was part of the motivation of why we got 5 million people out on the streets?
Yeah, I'm not sure there was any good timing for this kind of parade. I mean, it's not our tradition to have large military parades. There was one in 1991 was the last one after the Gulf War ended, but it really isn't our nature to have military parades. It's something that they do in dictatorships. Yeah, I do agree with Jay that probably having this event on Donald Trump's birthday probably it was just an exacerbation and irritation beyond all the pain and suffering that people are that are suffering. It's kind of like turning the screws or turning the knife in the back. It really agitated people. I think that again, that as all of this is going on, we've got. I refuse to call it a big beautiful bill. Let's just call it a tax bill. Is moving through
Okay.
Congress, um, and and it's really an unprecedented transfer of wealth from low and middle income people to very wealthy people. And it's just so hypocritical that you've got so many Republicans who for years have been harping about the deficit and the debt. And it's pretty clear that this is going to increase the debt by something like $5 trillion. Where have all these critics gone? Why are they falling into place? Um, I think we're living in a world now where people that are in Congress, at least the Republicans in Congress, and maybe some Democrats, all they care about is their reelection. That's the most important thing. So uh, if they believe, and apparently they do, that Trump can sabotage their reelection attempts, they'll do whatever he wants them to do. And regardless of whatever they said in the past about federal deficits, um, and different kinds of spending, if Donald Trump says support this bill, unfortunately, they're going to abdicate their responsibility to their constituents. They're going to ignore things like once upon a time, Legal Services Corporation, not once upon a time, last year, Services Corporation got $560 million to serve low and middle income residents all across the country. This budget has zero. It's $21 to close legal services. That's the only allocation. Um, so there's no way that people are sitting in Congress that aren't aware how this kind of a budget is going to hurt people living in their communities, but they don't care. Because again, the priority is I just want to make sure that my political career is not derailed and that Donald Trump isn't going to put somebody up against me and get Elon Musk to spend his money to make sure I don't get reelected. So, so that's really discouraging. Now, the thing about the rallies is that maybe, just maybe, the message can go to these legislators that we're not just angry at Trump, we're angry with you.
Mhm.
And if we're angry with you, maybe you're going to understand that we're not going to reelect you. And given that reelection is so important to you and the preservation of your political future is so important to you, maybe you'll take heed to the fact that we are getting very irritated and disgusted and disappointed with you. And you're seeing it in the town hall meetings. So maybe one of the benefits of these rallies is not only trying to get President Trump's attention, which is, I don't know if it makes any difference to him at all, but to get the attention of all the elected representatives that now maybe will be held accountable for what's happening. And to the degree that we keep expressing our dissatisfaction or disappointment, our anger with what's happening, if we can direct at least some of it or redirect it towards our own elected representatives, then maybe we can start getting some change.
I'm glad you brought that up, because, they always say all politics starts locally. And, you talk to any politician, when they get 5 letters or 5, complaints about a particular issue, even though it's 5 or less, they actually, their staff pays attention to it. And they, because 5 people took the time out to actually spend the energy to write and protest, either in letter form, email, or whatever. So the fact that you have 75,000 in Chicago, 70,000 in Seattle, I'm glad you brought up the fact that maybe legislatures are starting to balance out the threat of being primaried versus actual votes that may take place, and a silent majority that the politicians aren't even considering or haven't considered for quite a while. So thank you for bringing that up. Jeff, I went to the Honolulu's No Kings protest in front of the legislation building. And what I was impressed about was that the people on the sidewalk weren't just the boomers. I saw Gen X, I saw the millennials, I saw Gen Z, and that gave me hope that it's not just the retired boomers who think that the violation of the rule of law and trashing the Constitution was an important enough issue to come out and protest. Uh, what's your take on the No Kings protest, and do you think that maybe it's well represented by the various generations, and does it go beyond just a news cycle?
Well, I'll tell you what my disappointment was. I watched the parade in Washington and kept looking for the clowns on the parade route, and then I realized the clowns were in the viewing stand. So I mean, that was disappointing to have a parade without clowns actually marching, just watching. Um, you know, I think it's always nice when a couple of million people or whatever the final number will be show up in all the blue states. I don't find that surprising that you get 100,000 or 200,000 in New York and 75,000 in Philadelphia. What I liked was they got 75,000 in Salt Lake.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what gives me some hope. I'm not sure how much they got in some small farming community in Idaho. I'm not sure more than 5 people would have shown up, but maybe they did. Look, I think Trump loves this stuff. I mean, nobody's kind of talked about that. I think he thinks it's great because I think it plays into his base. And no one is going to outthink Donald Trump when it comes to media. That's his expertise. Governing, no, but knowing how to get an audience and knowing how to react or get people to react to people that oppose him. I mean, he's so petty. I mean, he won't even call Governor Walz to talk about the assassinations. He called him an idiot. I mean, but you think it's hurting him? I'm not so sure, guys. I mean, I don't see any indication other than what might happen in the Senate, David, on this bill. But even the people that are opposing it are not opposing it because of the reasons the Democrats are opposing it. They want more of a cut in the national debt. That's why 5 Republicans say they're going to vote against it, not because they're cutting out legal aid or Medicare or Social Security. These are people who are very conservative hawks, fiscal hawks when it comes to the budget. So it's great. I mean, I remember back. I'm not that old. Remember back in the '60s when people started marching in Washington, and it did affect Lyndon Johnson, and it did affect some of the representatives. But I think Donald Trump is such an ego-driven megalomaniac that I think he relishes this. And, he's not being held to account for anything. How many wars has he stopped? I mean, he promised to end Ukraine 24 hours. He probably promised to end Gaza and build it into a new resort, within 3 months. All he keeps doing is, manipulating the tariffs every single day, and then coming up with promises, none of which he's fulfilled. It would be interesting to know, and we'll never know, how many people would have shown up if they hadn't had the protest in Los Angeles on the immigration raids. But has that stopped them? Every day they're arresting a politician, an elected official, beating up people, separating kids from their families, and the country moves on. So, and now this thing with Iran, right? He was threatening that he was going to be able to end it. Now he's threatening to bomb him into oblivion. Jay's right. He's looking for headlines, and he'll get them. He'll get them every day, no matter what the issue is, either because he says something stupid or does something stupid.
I mean, isn't it coming a little bit more apparent to Americans and certainly people in the EU that the moniker taco, Trump always chickens out? Isn't that becoming a little bit more obvious to Americans, and that is tarnishing his charisma factor?
Yeah, well, I don't know what's happening in Europe. I don't think that's going to affect us very much. I mean, they all met and shook hands and kissed each other the other day in Canada before he had to go home early so he could get some headlines, Jay. I think I'll leave it. I'll leave a day early. After saying he's not going to sign, he signs. I mean, the guy's a joke. I mean, I'm sorry, but
that's my point.
But I don't know. We'll never know how many people are turning on him. The polls show that he's losing support, right? The polls show that his support is going down all the time. But you know what? We're not going to know much until the early part of next year, when candidates start to get anxious and put their names in and start running for Congress, because the country will go nowhere if the Democrats don't take over at least one house, either the Senate or the House, or otherwise it's going to be 3 more years of this fantasy that that Trump is living in.
Okay, great points. Jay, trying to chime in here with Jeff. We know that Trump has very thin skin, number one. Number two is we know that crowd size matters for Donald Trump. I think Michael Wolff, remember that name? He wrote a book in Trump's first term, and boy, the White House wasn't happy about that and tried to discredit him of everything that was written in the book. Well, he's coming out with some new statements that Donald Trump was very, very upset concerning the parade. And what upset Donald Trump, not necessarily crowd size, but he felt the people participating in the parade were not serious. They were goofing around. They were, kind of yucking it up. And that really infuriated him. And so the question here is this. If there should be another No Kings protest or something similar to that, the fact that Donald Trump didn't like it and his own parade was kind of a washout, does that motivate him to react stronger, tougher against the crowd? I'm not saying the implementation of the Insurrection Act, but certainly a little more of a tone of brutality. Does that motivate Donald Trump to react more and get more into the headlines about how these protests were handled?
Yes.
Yes.
Good night and good luck.
Hey, stretch that out, Jay. A little bit more for me.
Good night and good luck.
I hate when you do that to me. I want a little more.
Well, you see how they've reacted, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened in the last 72 hours with immigration. They haven't stopped anything. They've gotten more aggressive. Stephen Miller has talked about, and Trump has talked about, taking every immigrant out of every blue state. But what has he done on the other side? No more raids on farms, no more raids on hotels, no more raids on restaurants, because those are my people. And they're good. They're good immigrants, but if they live in Los Angeles, then they gotta go.
Yeah, but Jeff, he reversed himself on that.
He reversed that. He reversed that yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was only 24 hours. That's almost the record.
Let me do this, okay? Let me just do a little of this, okay?
Don't tell Jay to stretch. We're only a half hour. Right, David? We got to gang up.
You have to see this through the lens of The Apprentice. This is, and that is Trump's big card. It's a reality show. So yes, he's disappointed. He was angry at Hegseth because Hegseth didn't give him a serious parade, a threatening parade. So he dressed him down the following day. And that gets in the press. Everything gets in the press. This is a reality show. So and Jeff is right. Trump likes to do this. This is his strong suit, creating a reality show, even when it's not working very well. But objectively, it didn't work very well. There was nobody there. There was nobody in the bleachers. Trump was so sad looking. My favorite part was the tanks. The tanks squeak, and when there's no crowd, you can hear the squeak. And every tank that passed by squeaked. And the squeak is an accentuation of the fact that there was nobody there, because that's all you could hear. And the troops, not only were they having fun, but they were marching sloppy.
Yeah.
Hegseth doesn't know how to build a military, and he makes mistake after mistake in dealing with all these troops. So what I get out of this is it's an abject failure. But Trump is going to make a reality show point out of it about now we have to watch Trump because he's all mad. And B, he's going to be brutal. He's going to be brutal on immigration, on arresting people, and of course on international affairs, as in the Middle East. And I think you're right, Jeff, and I think David, you're right too, because at the end of the day, nobody is going to do a 25th Amendment resolution vote in his cabinet. They all belong to him, and they will continue to belong to him. And the GOP MAGA members of Congress are not going to impeach him, even though there have been a number of articles lately about impeaching him. He deserves, there's one article that said, here's 6, 7, 8 constitutional violations for which he should be impeached. But that's not going to happen. So we are watching entertainment. We are watching the reality show. And although, David, I certainly agree that the GOP is hypnotized, I also noticed an article in the paper about the Democratic Party. It is completely disorganized. There is no leadership. They are fighting among themselves. Aside possibly from Gavin Newsom, there's nobody surfacing as a leader of the Democratic Party. As Jeff said, maybe over the next year or so, we'll have a leader emerge. But right now, the Democratic Party is in tatters.
That's a real problem. You just raised it, and it's really the bottom line. There's no opposition, no organized, effective opposition. The media was, and they're collapsing. Law firms were, now they're getting back into opposing. District court judges, for the most part, are, but they're not a political party. There's no effective political party. And Newsom, we'll see how he comes out of this, whatever the courts ultimately do. The Ninth Circuit looked yesterday, and one of my friends is on the panel, and he asked some very tough questions to the California Attorney General. Looks like it may turn out to be 2-1, that Trump could call up the National Guard and could send in the Marines. So, the Supreme Court today, 6-3 against transgender medical care. I mean, folks, there's no effective opposition. And until that happens, and it hasn't, despite what's going on in the country, you really have to worry about, is there going to be any effective opposition come November of 2026? I'm not optimistic.
Okay, well, 5 million people, isn't that a cultural symbol that there is opposition, but it's not in the form of the legislature or, certainly some of these court decisions?
Well, on that question, I do think that the 5 million is partially attributable to the timing. Certain events came together, and the birthday was heavily politicized. So I think that is in part responsible for the 5 million. Now, in terms of opposition, I think it's just human nature that for most of us, we don't get riled up until it affects us personally. There were veterans at these rallies who are there because Trump is cutting funding to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So it's hurting them now. and now they're starting to oppose. The tariffs haven't come home yet. People are still, merchants are still living off their inventories. You're not seeing dramatic price rises yet, but you will. They're inevitable. And you know, it's about the economy, stupid. I mean, that's been a mantra for a long time. Prices are going to go up. It's unavoidable. When you have to restock those inventories and start paying for those tariffs. When people start having to pay more, it's finally going to come home that, why did this happen? Who's responsible for this? That's not going to be hard to figure out. So I guess I am a little optimistic that things. I'm sorry that it's taken so long, but things will begin to dawn on people that we can connect the dots. And this administration has made decisions and enacted policies that are actually going to hurt us pretty significantly.
But
And
David, you need a leader. You need a leader. You need somebody that people are going to. I hear you about the public, but I don't see any organized political party that has a leader. Whether that leader ultimately fails or not, and go back to Vietnam, there's no Gene McCarthy, there's no Martin Luther King, there's no Bobby Kennedy, there's no Ronald Reagan. I mean, who is there that's out there with a political party base that is doing anything? Schumer's a joke. The guy in the House is they're talking about kicking him out. Um, you have an 85-year-old guy going around the country getting the biggest crowds who has no chance of really ever being elected. So I don't disagree with you, David, but someone's got to come out. Moses has got to come out of the Red Sea, and the Democratic Party right now is a shambles.
Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to add something. It was not accidental that the Marines were called in. Whether that's legal or not is another question. It was not accidental that Trump bypassed Newsom on nationalizing the National Guard. That was not accidental. He's trying to develop a police state. And he's giving instructions to Kristi Noem, who is a very strange person. We could go on about that. To be brutal, and Tom Homan to be brutal, and to apply force, and to have weapons. And they had certain weapons. They were shooting rubber bullets last week. So I think that is going to increase. I think if you put yourself in Trump's shoes, you say, I know how to deal with this. I know how to avoid another no King's Day. I'll shoot some people. I'll kill them. I'll wound them. I'll shoot them in the knee, whatever it is. And they'll be at the top of the press. They'll be in the hospital. And they are going to scare all the mothers and daughters and children who make a festival out of coming to these no Kings rallies. And that's the way it was in Honolulu. You'll have to agree. And in a lot of these cities, it was festival. I remember I happened to be in Istanbul at the time of the riots in Taksim Park, where what's his name, Erdogan, was offended that they were having a peaceful rally, so he brought in his troops. And in the space of 3 days, it went from baby carriages and balloons to shooting people dead in Taksim Park. This could accelerate in no time. And what happens when you accelerate? What happens when you actually apply lethal violence by all these troops that he has shown, he has demonstrated he has the power to call in? What happens? People stay home. No more balloons, no more baby carriages, no more fun and games, festival atmosphere in front of the state capitol. They will stay at home. Trump has the power to do that. And I suggest to you there's at least a fair chance that the next time he will do that. And that means you won't see the 5 million again.
Jeff, I agree. We really need a national leader. Maybe it's Gavin Newsom. I think one reason that Trump did call out the National Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles was intentionally to create some escalation. So we can get a car burning in an intersection, and we can get a lot of video of that car burning in an intersection. And then come the next presidential election, we can show video of how Gavin Newsom let the city of Los Angeles burn. So I think that, you're right. It's great media operative. Operative.
Well,
But part of
right.
the reason was to collect damaging video against Gavin Newsom. So if he does begin to rise to national prominence, he's going to start showing the video.
I mean, I watched the protests like everybody else, and most of the people are, good, solid people, but all you saw were Gaza flags. I mean, Trump got great video from those demonstrations. I watched it all. You just got a bunch of bad people mixed up with an overwhelming number of good people, but all you see are flags from Gaza, flags from Iran. I mean, and Trump is loving it. His people are loving it. These are the people that have ruined the country. And thank God we have President Trump to make sure that they don't take over and that we maintain the white man's country.
Let me talk about the burning trash can for a minute. There was a burning trash can in LA. Mind you, as the mayor Bass said, the amount of geography on which this happened was like 4 miles out of 500 square miles. But there was a burning trash can. And this is a shiny object. And this goes to our lingering concern about the press handing Trump all that video you're talking about. So they all run over with their cameras and they're all circling the trash can and it's burning. Okay. One trash can is burning, just like those cars, one car, whatever it was, burning. And so you say to yourself, okay, that's one element of what's happening. But the press is, especially the conservative media, is playing that trash can over and over and over again, as if every trash can in the 500 miles of LA is burning. Now that is really dishonest reporting. That is indefensible non-journalism. And they are handing that video to Trump. Now, why can't the press be more responsible about that?
Well, I just distinctly remember the Howard Dean scream that was played over and over and over again, and that was the end of Howard Dean. So your point is well taken, Jay. Let me pivot back down to David for a minute. David, Vietnam War protests certainly painted a cultural imprint on the 60s and the first part of the 70s. And I'm thinking specifically the photo of the student bending over a dead classmate at Kent State, the Kent State shootings. Donald Trump's lucky that didn't happen here in Los Angeles. I think he's lucky because anything can happen when you have untrained military trying to do crowd control when they've been given maybe an hour and a half worth of training. He's taking a big gamble. Do we have any cultural imprint if these No King protests continue? Will there be any cultural imprint on our society from these protests?
Number one, I think they are going to continue. I think already they're talking about July 17th, about having another national rally. There's one thing I don't know. I can talk about it. That happened in Minnesota. I don't think I can. But that's certainly an imprint of this administration that models violence. Melissa was murdered.
Yeah. I mean, and Trump's reaction. I mean, you just don't know how horrible things can get and how horrible he can be. I mean, again, I brought up he won't even talk to the governor, called him an idiot after these assassinations. And he said virtually nothing. He hasn't gone to Minnesota. He's been almost silent, except that, somebody wrote him a statement that said how sorry he is. And there's no place in this country for violence. Where's the empathy in Trump? I mean, the problem is that how much of the country has changed their view of him in the 3.5 months of the disaster we've sat through. And again, polls are showing losing confidence, but you would think it would be plummeting. And it's not plummeting, it's going down. And every day he does something worse. And David, I can imagine you probably knew these people. And, I couldn't believe it when I heard it. Now I'm 6,000 miles away. Where's the president on basic human dignity? He's nowhere.
Jeff, are Americans desensitized to the disgust of Donald Trump? Have we been exposed to it for the last 10 years and we've become accustomed and immune to the depravity, the basement of his deplorable actions and words? Are we there now as a nation?
I think we're increasingly there. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think there's a lot of time to see what happens. I mean, every day is worse. I've said that before. But I'm not sure. Again, somebody has to lead the charge against Trump, and there is no organized ability to do so. And so you have these marches and you have these, what Jay has called baby carriages and balloons, and they're festive. And I don't think that's a bad idea. All that matters is what's happening at the ballot box. We'll have a little indication soon. I think there's a governor's race in Virginia or in New Jersey. And we'll see what happens. But some organized opposition to the Republican Party better start showing its face so that people like us who want to vote for the opposition have some reason to vote.
Kind of focusing and highlighting the cruelty. That is a major characteristic of this particular administration. And I don't think that's been emphasized or focused enough. And the consequences of that, it's modeling behavior. And, what you have then is people acting in similar fashion. Um, security's been ramped up for legislators all around the country. They have to recognize what happened here in Minnesota could very easily happen to them. Um, uh, I think that I think there has been a tremendous failing by our media. That again, as Jay puts it, they've been attracted to the shiny object. There are more important themes that need to be emphasized, and I think the theme of cruelty is one that really needs to be magnified.
I agree with Jeff's statement regarding a leader because, if you think about Edward R. Murrow, he was the leader that put a light on Eugene McCarthy and his horrible, attack on good, Americans that were not communists. And it took someone of that charismatic leadership that was successful to do that. So Jeff's spot on that. And David, I think you're right. I mean, what's it take for us to realize that we don't have someone pinpointing the depravity of Donald Trump? And are we past that as a nation that that actually counts in the form of votes?
I'm hoping it counts.
I'm hoping it counts. Okay, we're running out of time. Let's go around the table and get our final thoughts on this topic. I see Jeff is the perfect person to ask right now because he's involved with something here. Jeff.
No, I'm looking for a name because I'm really bad on names, and I want to make sure I make this comment because there is a hero out there, and it's Scott Pelley.
Oh, yes, right.
There is a hero. There is Scott Pelley. There just aren't enough Scott Pelleys who speaks truth to power, who's not afraid of losing his job, who does have some freedom on 60 Minutes despite what is going on, who stands up at Wake Forest and gives a speech that the president and his allies mock. But there aren't enough Scott Pelleys, and there are a lot of people who ripped him apart. But there are heroes out there, David. There just aren't enough of them, and hopefully they increase on a daily basis. So that's my last comment.
Great last comment. Thank you very much, Jeff. David, your last thoughts and comment.
I still believe that we got to put pressure on the individual legislators, and don't focus everything on Trump. He's being empowered, facilitated by our elected representatives who are not taking care of their constituents. And I think that to the degree that we're disappointed and angry, we need to refocus a lot of that energy on our elected representatives who I think are failing us.
And that pressure has to be greater than their fear of being primaried. Great point, David. Thank you. Jay, get the final word.
In the march to dictatorship, in the march to a police state, we are at yet another inflection point. In the past few days, we've crossed the Rubicon twice. He has effectively been able to call up the troops and take kinetic possession of the state of California. And this is not going to stop at that. He has demonstrated that he has the power to do that, and he will do it again. And it will intimidate people from coming out. It will intimidate people from forming an opposition. By the way, you know that he's attacking Act Blue, which is the primary Democratic method of raising funds and should be. But he's attacking it, and that has hurt Act Blue. The second crossing of the Rubicon of these legislators in Minnesota, which is so sad. But what it represents is something that we here on ThinkTech have followed for years, and that is the stochastic behavior of Trump and this administration, calling for violence, giving license for violence, defending violence, not condemning violence. And as a result, legislators and public officials are being arrested and killed. This is also doesn't suggest optimism. I'm sorry, David. It suggests intimidation. And over time, if Trump continues to do this, if there are more incidents like the ones that happened in Minnesota, people are going to be afraid, including legislators, including sitting legislators in all legislatures. So I'm very concerned that Trump has found the keys to the kingdom here. And these two events, even over the past few days, have suggested he knows how to play the game. He knows how to do this reality show. And finally, I don't know how it's going to play out. Nobody in the world knows how it's going to play out. But this affair in Iran, he's going to use to intimidate everyone, whether he attacks Iran or not. And I think that's just another element, another Rubicon to cross.
Alrighty. Well, before we conclude, and I think our esteemed guests, I'd just like to say it's my hope that the cup of disgust overfloweth, and Americans do as David you have suggested, and that is get involved with their legislators on the local level, and hopefully that will have a grassroots effect that affects Donald Trump and his perceived ability to squash our rule of law. So I'd like to thank Jeff Portnoy, our esteemed guest, and David Larson. Thank you for attending. And of course, Jay Fidel, my co-host. I'm Tim Apicella, the host for American Issues Take One. And join us next week. And until then, aloha.